On Fanalysis, we take the in-depth data born in fantasy football combined with the analytics of the betting trends to find the best plays each week. And we are joined by the lead betting analyst from Pickswise, Jared Smith, to talk about the most wagered sporting event of the year. We're taking a closer look at the prop bets of the Super Bowl. And, Jared, we're starting things out with Joe Burrow. His over-under on rushing yards, not passing yards, his over-under on rushing yards is 11.5. Why are we targeting this one, and how do you see this?
Yeah, and again, when you're looking at the props market, there's thousands of them for this game. It can get overwhelming. It even gets overwhelming for me, and I do this for a living every day. So my best advice, handicap the game first like you normally would any other game. Try to game script it. The game's in Hollywood, right? Be Quentin Tarantino, write your game script. And then you go through the prop market and you can kind of lean on certain correlations. For example, I think Joe Burrow is going to have the ball in his hands a lot in this game. I think the Bengals are going to be behind. I think the pass rush for the Rams is arguably the best in the league. And I think the Bengals offensive line has been spotty at best. So, well, how do we game script that out to a prop? Well, I think Joe Burrow is going to be running for his life, frankly, at times during this game. He had 25 yards in the AFC Championship game on the ground. He scrambled for a bunch of first downs. There is no holding back for next week. This is the end-all, be-all. The quarterback will risk, their body to get that extra yard or two, and that is why 11.5. I thought this number should have been in the mid-teens. And I think 11.5 is a really strong number. This is actually, of all the props we're giving out on the show, I would say this is my favorite one over Joe Burrow, 11.5 rushing yards. Yeah,
and there's a lot of things that actually point to this, though the Rams do run an abnormally high amount of zone defense, which is good against the run, but at the same time, they're also going to be bringing pressure off the edge, which could open things up in the middle. And there's one other nugget that would support your claim here. The Rams have allowed more than 11 yards rushing for a quarterback 10 times this year.
Love that.
So 10 times quarterbacks have broken loose. And think about it. All it takes is one of those plays, and he's got that one for you. All right. We really love to target mismatches, and one of the big mismatches is what's happening in the trenches. The over-under on sacks for both teams combined is at 5.5, and that's at plus 110. Why do you like this one?
Yeah, the over here makes a ton of sense. So we just told you why we think the Rams defensive line, they're first in pass rush win rate this year against the Bengals offensive line, 30th in pass block win rate. So I think the Rams could easily get 6 sacks on their own. Burrow's already been sacked 9 times in a playoff game just a few weeks ago. But I think it's on the Bengals side of the ball that really pushes me to the over here, Steve. And I think if you were going to ask me the 4 units in this game, Rams offense, Rams defense, Bengals offense, Bengals defense, I think the one unit that's not being talked about enough is the Bengals defense. And I think this is a very strong unit. They have been very feisty. Their numbers, their analytics started out the year kind of in the cellar, and they've been steadily climbing since. They've been fantastic in the playoffs. Hubbard and Hendrickson on the edge. They combined for 3.5 of the 4 sacks on Patrick Mahomes in the AFC Championship game. If the Bengals sack Matthew Stafford 4 times in this game like they did the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, this number is going to fly over. So I think the Rams defensive line very capable of getting the lion's share of sacks here, but I don't think we're talking enough about this Bengals front, especially those 2 rush ends, Hubbard and Hendrickson. They've been fantastic this year, and I think over 5.5 sacks at plus money, a very strong bet.
Yeah, what's crazy is when you actually look at the postseason numbers, the Bengals actually have 8 postseason sacks this year. The Rams have 5, though we are talking quite a bit about that little mismatch between what the Rams can do in bringing pressure against that Bengals offensive line, which still feels a little bit like it's a makeshift offensive line right now. This next one is in the trenches, but flipping the other way. Rams running back Sony Michel, over or under 18.5 rushing yards. I actually can't believe that this is the number, because what this is really predicated on is how the carries are divvied up. And you have to ask yourself, is Sony Michel going to get more than 4 carries in the game?
I think yes. And the rushing attempts prop is another way to play this. But I think the yards is where I go, because he could bust one of those for easily 19 yards. Michel's been, really consistent. and Akers hasn't. 2.8 yards per carry in the playoffs, 2 fumbles lost. And I think the Super Bowl experience, there's a couple guys on the Rams roster that have been to Super Bowls before. Of course, the Rams have been there recently, but also guys that have won the Super Bowl before. The Rams, anyone who was on the Rams Super Bowl team a couple years ago did not experience that euphoria, but Sony Michel did with the Patriots. So has Von Miller. So I think when you look at guys that have been there before, that have had success there before, Michel scored the only touchdown in that Super Bowl for the Patriots against the Rams a few years ago. He had 94 yards on 18 carries. I think Akers and Michel are going to be more of a split workload, whereas Akers rushing totals in the 60s and Michel's down at 18.5. So a game script again. If the Rams get out to an early lead, what have we seen from Sean McVay? He will rely on the run. And I think Michel is going to be the more reliable of these two backs. And 18.5 seems too low to me.
Yeah, I mean, you take a look at what is happening. Look, Cam Akers is really kind of just coming back more or less, and he's not gotten the amount of carries, and he's certainly not broken them like we expected him to, but it has been Michel that they've been relying a lot more on. And there is, if you talk about building that game script, there is a belief that the Rams are going to have that lead, and they're going to want to try to milk the clock. So why wouldn't Michel get all of those rushing yards? All right. Rams receiver Van Jefferson over under longest reception, 17.5 yards. Man, I hate these. I really do, man. Longest reception, 17.5. What makes you point to this one?
Yeah, and you want to take his receiving yards prop is in the mid 30s. I'm fine with playing that as well, but I just think it's the matchup here. So first I'll go to the stats, then we'll talk about the matchup. The stats say that Van Jefferson's got the longest average yards per catch on the entire Rams team, longer than Cooper Kupp, longer than Odell Beckham this year. That might surprise some people. Now, maybe the volume has to do with that. Cooper Kupp obviously has had more receptions, so you have to have more long receptions in order to get that average up. I understand that. But my point is Jefferson has been a bit of a deep threat for this Rams team this year. And now let's talk about the matchups. Mike Hilton is the slot corner for the Bengals. If I'm Sean McVay, I'm doing everything I can to move Cooper Kupp around the line of scrimmage, which he's done very often this year, get him into the slot and get him onto Mike Hilton. That's a very favorable matchup, I'd say, for Cooper Kupp, even though I think Hilton, as we've discussed, is a plus nickel corner. So that leaves the two other receivers, Odell and Jefferson, on the outside. I would say Awuzie is going to check up Odell. Awuzie is the best cover corner for the Bengals. He's done a tremendous job this year. Did a great job on Tyreek Hill in the second half of that game. That, to me, is a matchup that kind of favors the Bengals. Odell could still win that matchup, but I think it's more even. So let's go to the other side. Our good old friend Eli Apple for the Giants going up against Van Jefferson. That is a plus matchup for the Rams. Jefferson is a top-notch receiver. He gets overlooked a little bit because of those other two great receivers on the Rams. Of course, they had Robert Woods as well, so he went down with an injury. But I think Jefferson can win that one-on-one with Eli Apple, and the Bengals like to get up on your face. They like to press. They like to play a lot of man-to-man. One crack down the field for Stafford to Jefferson. He had it in the Cardinals game in the wild card round. He had a 40-plus yard reception. I could see that kind of play cracking this one to the over. And then that's it. You get one reception of over 17.5 yards, Steve. It's over. It's done. And I think the matchup's favorite, too, for Jefferson.
And Eli Apple has always kind of made his career on risk versus reward. And so he's averaging 12 yards per reception this year. Eli Apple's opponents are averaging 12 yards per reception. And the quarterbacks who throw to him, their passer rating is actually 86.6. Does it surprise you that their passer rating is so low considering all of the chances that Apple takes out there?
Could be. I mean, I think a lot of that's in context too. Who's he guarding during those, situations? Is he guarding a receiver, as talented and as prone to going deep as Jefferson? Again, I was surprised when I saw the numbers of just how much of a deep threat Jefferson's been. I mean, he's 2.5 yards clear of Cooper Kupp for average yards per catch this year. And we view Cooper Kupp as the best receiver in the NFL, who's had an amazing year of long, deep passes. Talk about the NFC divisional round, catching basically the game-winning pass until the field goal kicked it through. So I think when you look at this Rams team, they have more options on offense than the Bengals do. The Bengals are very good. Maybe the top of the Bengals offense with Chase and Higgins. I would take those against Odell and Kupp. But I think the Bengals' third wide receiver, Tyler Boyd, I think Jefferson's better in that regard. And I think the Bengals don't have two running backs like the Rams do. So I just think the options for Matthew Stafford are more plentiful. And that's why I'm willing to go with a Michel or a Jefferson and stay away from a guy like a Kupp or an Odell, because I do think the numbers are a little more favorable down the line, because I think the Rams can win their third receiver against the Bengals' third corner. In this case, it would be Apple on the outside. To me, those are matchups that I think LA can have success with.
And that's what I love about the Super Bowl. It gives us 2 weeks to really break down the possible matchups here, and you can really get into the nitty-gritty and the minutia of how teams will play against one another, and then how will they adjust, because that's really the big factor, is what's going to happen in the second half. Bengals running back Joe Mixon's rush yard line is at 64.5. Will he go over or under?
I think under here. And again, game script is the first place I point to. How do I see this game playing out? I see the Bengals running it on early downs, and that's been their MO. But the Rams, again, their run block win rate is tops in the league this year. They've done a tremendous job stopping the run, and they've only allowed two backs to go over this number since week 12. And I think when you look at the success rate, top 10 in the league against the run, when you look at what the Bengals have tried to do offensively, if it's not early down runs, the ball's going to be in Joe Burrow's hands. He went over this in the AFC Championship game, but a lot of that was in overtime when the Chiefs were just dog tired after a 60-minute slugfest where they blew a 21-3 lead. And I think the game script, to me, dictates the Rams will be ahead in the second half, which means the ball is going to be in Burrow's hands. And a lot of times what we see, Mixon off the field on 3rd and long, for Pirine. That's the guy I would look to in the props market for the Bengals. If you want to look over in receiving yards, I would say Pirine or Mixon. Receiving yards to the over is more favorable. Rushing yards, I would lean under, just because of how I see the game script playing out.
Well, it sounds like this game script has pretty much been figured out, at least in your mind. We'll see what actually happens on Sunday. That's how he sees the props for the Super Bowl. But what about the novelty props? Check out our other segment. For Jared Smith of Pickswise, I'm Steve Overmyer. This is Fanalysis.